He had been a Windows developer for 7 years. 7 years of Visual Studio. 7 years of right-clicking and selecting Run as administrator. 7 years of updates that arrived at the worst possible moment, of driver conflicts that appeared without explanation, of a task manager that told him something was using 40% of his CPU, but refused to tell him why. 7 years of working inside a system that felt more and more with each passing month, like a house he was renting from a landlord who kept changing the locks. And then, one afternoon, in the middle of a particularly brutal debugging session, he read a comment on a forum that changed everything. "Just switch to Linux," it said. "It's what real developers use. Everything works better. The terminal is incredible. The package manager will change your life. You'll wonder why you waited so long." He stared at that comment for a long time. He had heard things like this before. He had always dismissed them, filed them, under things people say on the internet that don't apply to my actual life. But something about that afternoon, about that debugging session, about the third consecutive Windows update that had broken a dependency he needed for a project that was already 2 weeks behind deadline, something made him take the comment seriously. He opened a new tab. He started reading about Linux. 3 hours later, he had downloaded an ISO. Nobody told him what was actually coming. The first decision was the distribution. And if you have never stood at this particular crossroads before, understand that it is not a simple crossroads. It is not a fork in the road between two clear options. It is more like arriving at an intersection in an unfamiliar city at night, where every street sign is in a language you almost recognize, where every direction looks equally reasonable and equally uncertain, and where 17 strangers are standing on the corners, each confidently pointing in a different direction while quietly judging you for not already knowing the way. Ubuntu, Fedora, Debian, Arch, Manjaro, Linux Mint, Pop! OS, OpenSUSE, Gentoo, NixOS, each one with its own community, each community with its own strong opinions, each set of strong opinions delivered with a particular brand of confidence that exists only in open source forums and operating system debates, where being right is important and being helpful is optional. He read the comparisons. He read the best distro for developers articles. He read the Reddit threads where people argued about package managers, with the intensity of people arguing about things that actually matter. He eventually landed on Ubuntu, not because he was certain it was the best choice, but because it appeared in more just start here recommendations than anything else. And at a certain point, the decision fatigue of choosing a Linux distribution becomes its own reason to just pick one and move forward. He flashed the ISO to a USB drive. He booted from it. The installer appeared clean and friendly and full of options that seemed, on the surface, completely reasonable. He clicked through. He chose his partition scheme, the recommended option, because the alternative involved manually defining partition sizes and mount points and file system types, which was a conversation he was not ready to have at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. The installation completed. The system rebooted. The Grub bootloader appeared, another new experience, another menu full of options he hadn't expected. And he selected Ubuntu. The desktop loaded. It was genuinely beautiful. Clean, fast, responsive in a way that surprised him after years of Windows startup times that felt like they were loading the entire history of computing before letting him see a taskbar. He moved the cursor, opened a terminal, felt, in that first moment, a small electric thrill. The sense that he was somewhere new, somewhere powerful, somewhere that was going to change the way he worked. That feeling lasted approximately 40 minutes. The first thing he needed was his development environment. His stack was not exotic. Node.js, Python, Docker, a couple of databases, a code editor, the standard toolkit of a back-end developer in the current era. On Windows, this had meant downloading installers, clicking through wizards, adding things to path variables that he never fully understood, but which always seemed to sort themselves out. On Linux, he had been told this would be better, cleaner, more elegant. The package manager would handle everything. He opened the terminal. He typed his first apt install command. It worked. He felt good. He installed Node.js. He installed Python. He installed Docker. Each one installed cleanly, producing long, scrolling lines of terminal output that he was learning to read. Not fluently yet, but enough to recognize when something was completing successfully versus when something was producing a warning he didn't yet know how to interpret. And then he ran Docker, or tried to run Docker. The command executed. The error message appeared. It told him, in the particular way that Linux error messages have of being simultaneously precise and completely opaque to someone who doesn't already know what they mean, that the Docker daemon was not running. He Googled the error. He found the fix, a systemctl command to start the Docker service. He ran it. Another error appeared. He Googled that one. He found a Stack Overflow answer from 3 years ago that described his exact situation and proposed a solution that involved editing a configuration file in a directory he had never heard of. He navigated to the directory. He opened the file with a text editor. He made the change. He restarted the service. Docker ran. He breathed. He moved on. The code editor came next. This part, at least, was familiar. VS Code exists on Linux, works on Linux, feels almost exactly like it does on Windows. He installed it. He opened his project. He felt the brief, warm comfort of a familiar interface inside an unfamiliar operating system, like finding a restaurant you recognize in a city you've never visited before. He tried to run his project. The dependencies were missing. Not all of them, just enough of them, just the precise, specific subset of dependencies, that the project failed to start with an error message pointing to a native module that had compiled correctly on Windows but was, on Linux, expecting a system library that wasn't installed. He Googled the library. He installed it. He tried again. A different native module failed. He installed the library that one needed. He tried again. A third failure. He was beginning to understand something about Linux that the forums had not quite prepared him for, that it is not that things don't work. It is that making things work requires a specific kind of knowledge, built one problem at a time, and that the only way to acquire that knowledge is to have the problems, one at a time, in exactly the order they arrive, with no ability to skip ahead. He installed the third library. He ran the project. It started. He stared at the terminal output for a moment, confirming that what he was seeing was genuinely a running server and not some new kind of failure that merely looked like success. It was running. He moved on. The database was next. He needed PostgreSQL. He installed it through apt. He tried to connect to it. The connection was refused. He Googled. He found that PostgreSQL on Ubuntu requires the service to be started manually or configured to start on boot, and that by default, it does neither with quite the automatic enthusiasm that Windows software tends to exhibit. He started the service. He tried to connect again. The connection worked. He needed to create a user. He needed to set a password. He needed to configure authentication settings in a file called pgdhba.conf, a file whose name he had never seen before and whose location required a specific find command to locate. He found it. He edited it. He restarted the service. He connected. He created his database. He ran his migrations. 4 hours had passed since he installed the OS. He had a running development environment. Not a polished one, not a perfectly configured one, but a working one, which was the thing he had needed. And the fact that it had taken 4 hours instead of the 40 minutes he had vaguely imagined felt, in that moment, like something between a lesson and a warning. He closed his laptop. He went to bed. He told himself tomorrow would be smoother. Tomorrow was not smoother. Tomorrow brought the discovery of file permissions. Linux file permissions are one of those systems that, once you understand them, feel elegant and logical and obviously correct. In the process of understanding them, they feel like a bureaucratic nightmare designed by someone who wanted to make things difficult for people who hadn't earned the right to make things easy yet. He tried to run a script. Permission denied. He Googled. He learned about chmod. He made the script executable. He ran it. It executed, but failed to write to a directory it needed to write to. Permission denied again. He learned about chown. He changed the ownership of the directory. He ran the script again. It worked. He tried to access a port below 1024, a standard port his development server needed to run on. Blocked. Linux, he discovered, does not let regular users bind to ports below 1024 without either running as root or granting specific capabilities to specific executables. He did not want to run his development server as root. He learned about setcap. He ran the command. The port was accessible. He moved on. He tried to install a global NPM package that the project needed. Permission denied. He Googled. He found a long and passionate debate about the correct way to handle global NPM packages on Linux without using sudo, an action that every experienced Linux developer in every forum agreed was something you should never do, without always clearly explaining the alternative. He followed a guide that involved reconfiguring NPM's global directory to a location inside his home folder. He did it. He installed the package. It worked. and completely without malice, proven incorrect. He fixed it by adding a configuration block to his .basic file. He tested it. It held. He moved on, carrying with him the growing awareness that Linux was not difficult in the way that hard mathematics is difficult or in the way that learning a new language is difficult. Linux was difficult in the way that understanding a new city is difficult. Not impossible, not even particularly steep once you were moving, but full of moments where you confidently turned down what you were certain was the right street and found yourself somewhere entirely unexpected. By the end of the first week, he could feel himself changing, not dramatically, not in ways he could easily describe to someone who hadn't been through it, but in small, specific, meaningful ways. He was reading error messages differently, not scanning them for keywords the way he used to, but actually reading them, following their logic, using them as maps rather than obstacles. He was Googling differently, more precise queries, better keywords, a stronger instinct for which results would be useful and which would be 3 years out of date and no longer applicable to his version of anything. He was developing a mental model of the system, where things lived, why they lived there, how they talked to each other, what they expected, and what they produced. He was, slowly, without having planned to, learning how computers actually work. Not the surface version, not the version that exists behind graphical interfaces and installation wizards and the carefully managed abstractions that operating systems build between users and the actual mechanics of what is happening underneath. The real version. The version where a process has an owner and a permission level and a set of file descriptors and a place in a process tree. The version where a network connection is a socket, and a socket has a state, and a state can be inspected with a tool called netstat that tells you, in plain text, exactly what is listening on exactly which port and why. The version where the system is not a mysterious black box that either works or doesn't work, but a collection of understandable, inspectable, configurable pieces. Each one with documentation, each one with a manual, each one behaving exactly as it is configured to behave once you understand what it is configured to do. He had spent 7 years working in a house where the walls were painted over, and the pipes were behind the plaster, and the wiring was inside the ceiling, and everything worked fine right up until it didn't. And when it didn't, there was nothing he could do except call someone else and wait. Now he was living in a house where every wall was glass, where every pipe was visible, where every wire ran openly along the baseboards and could be traced from source to destination without mystery or guesswork. It was less finished looking. It was more demanding. It required him to know things he had never needed to know before, but nothing broke without him understanding why, and nothing stayed broken without him being able to fix it. And that specific thing was something he had not expected to feel as profoundly as he did. 3 weeks in, his terminal history read like a memoir. Every command, a chapter. Every error message, a plot point. Every solved problem, a small, hard-won victory that had changed in some permanent and irreversible way the shape of his understanding. His code editor was configured exactly how he wanted it. His development server started in a single command. His database connected automatically on boot. His SSH key persisted across sessions. His scripts ran without permission errors because he now understood, with genuine clarity and not just rote memorization, what permissions meant and how to set them correctly. His Docker containers orchestrated cleanly, talking to each other through a network he had defined and could inspect and could modify and could completely understand. The system that had humbled him in the first week had, by the third week, started to feel like an extension of his thinking. Not a tool he was fighting, a tool he was fluent in. Not perfectly. Fluency in Linux, he had come to understand, is not a destination so much as a direction, a continuous process of learning that never fully ends and never fully needs to end, because the learning itself is most of the value. He had written more efficient code in 3 weeks on Linux than he had written in months on Windows, not because Linux made him smarter, because Linux made his thinking visible, because when you cannot hide behind a graphical interface, when you cannot click through a wizard and trust that the wizard got it right, when you have to explicitly understand what you're doing and why you're doing it in order to make anything happen at all, you get better. Not faster at first, but deeper. And deep eventually becomes fast in a way that surface-level fast never quite manages. There's a version of this story where it goes the other way, where the permission errors pile up past the point of patience, where the SSH key problem on day 3 is the moment the USB drive goes back into the drawer and Windows gets reinstalled with a quiet sense of having tried and found it not worth the effort. That version is real. It happens to a lot of people who make the switch. And those people are not wrong for making that choice. Linux demands something from you before it gives you something back. And not everyone is in a position to make that exchange at any given moment in their life. But for the people who are, for the developers who have the time and the stubbornness and the particular appetite for understanding how things actually work underneath the surfaces that are built to keep you comfortable, the exchange is worth it. The exchange changes the kind of developer you are in ways that persist long after the learning curve flattens and the error messages stop feeling like walls and start feeling like information. He knows this now. He knows it because he lived it. Every permission denied, every daemon that needed starting, every configuration file in an unexpected directory, every Stack Overflow thread from 3 years ago that was almost right but required one additional step that took 40 minutes to find. All of it. He knows it because he went through it, because that was me. It was always me. I am the developer who spent 7 years on Windows and read one forum comment and downloaded an ISO and spent the first week feeling like I had made a catastrophic mistake, and the second week feeling like I was beginning to understand something, and the third week feeling, for the first time in a very long time, like I was genuinely, completely in control of the machine I was sitting in front of. And if you are watching this with a Linux ISO on your desktop that you downloaded 3 weeks ago and haven't opened yet, or a terminal window open with a command you found online that you're not quite sure you should run, or a forum tab telling you that your distro choice is wrong and you should start over, close the forum, open the terminal, run the command. You will break things, you will fix them, you will break them again differently, you will fix them again better. And somewhere in that cycle, somewhere between the first permission denied and the first time everything runs exactly the way you intended because you made it run that way, you will stop asking whether Linux is easy because you will already know the answer, and you will know that easy was never the point.